Союзное Вече представляет актуальная повестка, новые факты и волнительные прогнозы только в программе Евгения Давутова «На связи».
Здравствуйте, дорогие зрители, в эфире
Dear viewers, this is the program «На связи», Connected. My name is Davutov, and please subscribe to our channel «Союзное Вече», the Union Assembly, and give us likes and please watch us. And any interview that we organize here, you can read or you can watch within the channel, on the channel of the Parliamentary Assembly between Belarus and Russia. And we're talking to the ex-analyst of the CIA, Larry Johnson. Larry, good morning or good day.
Good day to you.
The first question that I wanted to ask, if I may, this is a question that is related to the special military operation, as we call it. It is related to Ukraine, to the United States, it's about Europe, and so on. When we watch TV, when we read newspapers, we note one interesting thing. Well, for example, your president, Donald Trump, is telling Ukraine different things. Well, I'm not quoting him, but more or less he is saying, please leave the territory of Donbas. He is explaining to Europe that Europe is getting weaker and it has become a problem more than a solution. And in the U.S. national strategy, we see a sensation, because this document says that neither China nor the Russian Federation are enemies of the United States anymore. This is a sensation. But I wanted to compare this to the Second World War. We might remember that at that time, Europe in its entirety attacked the Soviet Union. We remember that Joseph Stalin, who was the commander-in-chief of the Red Army at that time, was asking the United States to open up the second or a second front. Don't you think that this situation may repeat itself when our Russian experts are claiming that somewhere in 2028 or 2030 Europe may attack Russia? But the US is distancing itself, and we don't know what may happen after Donald Trump leaves. We don't know who the new president will be after Trump, what the ideas of this new president will be, and don't you think that the history may repeat itself?
Short answer, yes, but in history doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme. Okay, and let's step back and look at sort of the actual landscape, and I think it is imperative that the people of Russia understand that there is no possibility of peace with the West. That may sound harsh, but the notion that you can negotiate in good faith with Washington, D.C., and with Donald Trump in particular, does not guarantee that the elements that we refer to as the deep state are going to give up on their dream of destroying Russia. There's no interest in coexisting with Russia. That's what people don't seem to grasp. They think, okay, we can talk to the Americans and we'll find a mutual accommodation. I don't care what Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner say. And it really doesn't matter what Donald Trump says. Unless there is an agreement as a treaty in which the U.S. Congress votes to endorse it and accept it, short of that, there is no agreement that Russia can make with the United States that the U.S. will uphold. And just look at the language. Trump's saying they're trying to convince the Ukrainians to give back the Donbass. Well, what about Zaporizhia? What about Kherson? Those two new republics in the Russian Federation are permanently part of Russia. And Russia, President Putin laid out the demands more than a year ago, June 14th, 2024, stipulating that Crimea, Zaporizhia, Kherson, Donetsk, and Luhansk, that those are now and forever will be part of Russia. Those are not items to negotiate over. The West still does not grasp that. And until the West accepts that fundamental principle, I don't see any hope for any kind of successful negotiations.
Ну, вы сейчас сказали, что вы выразились
Well,
очень
you
четко. На самом деле,
you were very harsh, yes, but well,
также
as
практически
harsh
говорят,
as it gets, I would say. But well, we see that many political scientists in Russia are claiming that there can be no compromise with the West, that we should go to the end
вопрос
on this issue. And
я говорил про войск северного
well,
Донбасса, там
I was
опорные точки, связанные
talking
с
about
переговорным
troops
процессом
leaving the territory of Donbass.
Украины и
And well,
здесь появляется
the US is trying to find common ground with Ukraine and Europe, but I have a question. On the one hand, Donald Trump, the US president, is claiming that Ukraine must leave the territory of Donbass, talking about its army. But President Zelensky, on the other hand, wants to hold a referendum on this issue. And the referendum may show that the Ukrainian population does not want the Ukrainian army to leave Donbass, and Russia will be unhappy with this. And as an outcome, we will see an ongoing military operation. And in this case, Zelensky is a figure that nobody needs, so his life will be threatened. And what do we see? We see a very interesting triangle here. We see Europe headed by London, I would say. And then we see Donald Trump heading the US, and the third side of the triangle is Ukraine and Zelensky. So what do you think? Who is who in this triangle?
Well, let's start with Donald Trump. If you saw, there was a photo earlier, was it yesterday or maybe it was late last week, where there was Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner, and Larry Fink of BlackRock. So all of a sudden now BlackRock makes its appearance in this scheme. Candidly, Trump is not the decision maker. He's sort of the lead clown in a circus parade. The guy you put out front. But as far as actually being able to make the decisions, he doesn't understand the root causes of the conflict with Ukraine. He doesn't understand his own role that he has played unwittingly during his first term in expanding NATO and U.S. European Command military exercises in Ukraine. They increased under Donald Trump. They didn't diminish. So you need to look at and say what concrete measures is the United States taking to bring an end to this war. It could end it tomorrow. It cuts off the intelligence, orders the CIA out, shuts down all intelligence sharing, turns off Starlink, and cuts off the money. War is over. But that's not what's going on, because there is money to be made in this war. Continuing this war is benefiting certain corporations and certain oligarchs in the West. And that, the evidence of that was the appearance of Larry Fink as, quote, part of this negotiation process. He shouldn't be anywhere near it. They invested an enormous amount of money and stand to lose billions of dollars when Russia prevails. So this drama that we see with the European, and I wouldn't pin it on just Starmer. You have to bring in Macron and Merz of Germany as well as sort of the triumvirate making the decision, trying to make the decisions for Europe. They have a vested interest in keeping the conflict going too. Again, it's all about money. And I think Russia's only option is to complete a military defeat of Ukraine and of its NATO masters. That's the only way you're going to have any hope for a genuine peace. They have to be defeated. They're not going to negotiate. There's no common ground. This isn't like you're trying to buy a new car and the dealer's asking $30,000 for it and you only have $26,000. So you got to figure out a way to negotiate where you can come to an agreement. This is not that. The West does not have a sincere desire to negotiate and cut a deal with Russia. And to the extent that Russians believe that's possible, I'm here to tell you it's not.
Ну, то есть из вашего ответа можно
Well, it means,
что
judging by your words, that, well, for example, well, not for example, de facto, around Donald Trump, there are some people, some forces that are against the peace between Ukraine and Russia. They don't want to see a peaceful arrangement or a peaceful agreement or a peaceful treaty that would be positive to the maximum degree for Russia. And judging by your words, I can come to a conclusion that Donald Trump, unlike Joseph Stalin, he cannot get some people out of his inner circles, the circle that are standing in the way between him and achieving peace in Ukraine. Well, because Donald Trump is actually waging this foreign policy of the U.S.
Yeah, well, I don't think Donald Trump is altogether there mentally. I think, the man's approaching, he's over 80 or just turned 80, but there's something wrong with him. He's not thinking straight. We had this, this famous movie director and producer, Rob Reiner, was murdered the other day by his son, allegedly by his son. And Trump put out a post on his social media channel, Truth Social, and basically blaming Rob Reiner's death on Reiner's dislike of Donald Trump. I mean, completely crazy. It's out of touch with reality. And that's where we've continued to watch with respect to what goes on with Russia, this flip-flopping back and forth by Donald Trump. 1 minute there's a deadline, then the next day no deadline, and then 1 minute he's blaming Putin, then the next minute he's blaming Zelensky. He's not a stable person. If Russia hopes to succeed in negotiations with the United States, it has got to be removed from the personality of Donald Trump. It has to be an actual treaty, something written down that then the U.S. Congress votes on, approves. Because without that approval, you don't have the investment of the other politicians into the process. So as soon as Donald Trump either dies in office, is forced to leave because of health, or maybe finishes his term and is gone, there'll be someone new who can come in and change it. Whatever Donald Trump agrees to, short of having it enshrined in a treaty, then his words are meaningless. You can't count on them.
Ну вот вы сейчас несколько раз сказали, что...
Well, you said several times that something is wrong with Donald Trump and that he's saying this, next minute he's saying that, and I believe that in Russia we see this also, and sometimes, well, people look at this as a joke, but on the other hand, the situation is a very interesting one. In my first question, I already said that Donald Trump does not believe that China or Russia are U.S. enemies anymore, on the one hand, but on the other hand, I believe that he wants to create this G5 or whatever you may call it. China, Russia, India, Japan, and the U.S. will be part of this G5. And I have another question. Don't know if this is a logical question. Well, after your responses, well, you are an American, you come from the US, and you know the US mentality, and you say that, well, Trump says this and Trump says that, and political scientists in Russia are asking themselves, is Donald Trump a globalist or is he an anti-globalist? So this is a follow-up to my previous questions.
Donald Trump is a Trumpist. He's not pro or anti-globalist. It's whatever puts him at the center of attention and elevates him to the top. You know, whatever makes Donald Trump the star, the center of attention, that's what he is. He's always, you know, many politicians and political leaders around the world can be accused of narcissism. But Donald Trump takes it to a new level. He is the consummate narcissist. And so he does, you know, I'm trying to convey that his mentality is not one of, how can I get along with other countries? How can I work with Russia and China to build a better future, to build a world in which there is no war, genuinely about peace? That's not, he says the words, but look at the actions. That is the critical thing. So you've mentioned this new national security strategy document and the fact that, yes, they have toned down the mentions of Russia and China as enemies, and now referred to more as adversaries. But that shift in language was more a function of the person that authored this document. I believe it was Elbridge Colby, the Deputy Secretary of Defense or of War, now that they call it the Department of War. But it doesn't actually reflect a fundamental change in the attitudes of the deep state, the bureaucrats that inhabit the Central Intelligence Agency, the Pentagon, the National Security Agency, State Department. There is, I look at it from the standpoint of watching U.S. media, whether it's network television or what's on cable or what's on the internet. And there is no room given to talk about why Russia is the aggrieved party in this conflict, why Russia was provoked. Instead, there is a concerted effort to block anybody like me, Scott Ritter, Doug McGregor, Jeffrey Sachs, John Mearsheimer. You know, we can go down the list of people that have an alternative, what I call a more objective view of this conflict, and explaining why the United States is responsible in large part for it. Those voices aren't allowed. There's a complete monopoly over the flow of information now. And so with this kind of propaganda, you can't change the attitudes and beliefs. People are taught here in the United States basically that Russia is still a communist country, that it's an authoritarian state, that you've got secret police everywhere that are preventing you from speaking and saying what you think. They really believe that here. And I can't emphasize this enough. It's not superficial. It is, I'm much older than you. I grew up during the Cold War, born in 1955. A year or two after the death of Stalin. But lived through the Khrushchev and then Brezhnev and then Andropov, up through Gorbachev. And during that entire period, there was still different voices in the United States and a different attitude about the Soviet Union. We've got more Americans today there's a greater negative attitude towards Russia today than existed during the Cold War, when there was actually a communist government, when there actually was complete control of the media in what we now call Russia. We're trying to change the attitudes in the West is very, very difficult because they are convinced that your economy is falling apart. They're convinced that your army is weak. They are convinced that Vladimir Putin is a corrupt dictator. They are convinced that Russia is intent on conquering the world. These are all lies, but they are deeply believed here in the West. That's what I'm trying to get across.
Я думаю, так работает пропагандистская машина.
Well, I believe that this is about the propaganda machine in the US, and the reason for this is the fact that the United States is a train that is going from point A to point B, and it doesn't matter if it is headed by Obama, Trump, Biden, it is still going from A to B.
Correct. Да.
Да, и вот перед тем, как мы перейдем с вами...
Yes, and before we start discussing a next series of questions, I wanted to show you a book made in the CIA, it's called. And it is published by Komsomolskaya Pravda, and unfortunately I cannot give it to you because we are speaking on Zoom, but if you are interested, you will be able to read it. We will send you, we will publish a link, and maybe if you will have read it, maybe 1 or 2 months later, we will discuss it.
It's the title is Made in the CIA?
Yes, in Russian. Okay, Сделано в ЦРУ, it's like made in the USA, made in Russia. So this is made in the CIA.
What is it about?
Это книга про тайные операции.
This is a book about covert operations of the CIA in the whole world. Well, these are the CIA operations that people can talk about today. Some of them still remain classified, as we know.
Yeah, please send me the link. I'd love to read it. I'd compare it.
Друзья, мы рады вам сообщить, что вышла новая сенсационная книга, сделана в ЦРУ. Прочитав ее, вы реально узнаете о том, сотрудничал ли Ли Харви Освальд с Центральным разведывательным управлением, был ли он у них на заметке. Кроме того, в книге раскрыты и многие другие тайны этой мощной разведывательной службы. Заказать книгу можно по ссылке в описании, а использовав промокод HISTORY15, вы получите 15% скидку.
I don't know if you're familiar with a book by Jeffrey Weiner called Legacy of Ashes, which basically tells the history of the CIA's covert operations from 1947 up through, I think, 1995, 96. And it's quite detailed.
Хорошо, спасибо. Я обязательно
Okay, thank you very much. I'll try to find it and I will read it. The next question, it is a topic that is related to the politics of Donald Trump, to the relations between different parts of his policies and so on. Well, if you look at the geopolitical map, we will see another sensation. At the diplomatic level, we see that the relations between the United States and Belarus are getting warmer, so to say, between Donald Trump and Alexander Lukashenko, the president of Belarus. I have a question. Is this an outcome of the policy of genius of Lukashenko, or is Donald Trump such a great businessman who, when he sees an opportunity or a new partner, he goes to this partner, and this partner is his best friend, but tomorrow there will be no business relation between him and the partner, and he will say, let's dump the partner. Well, it's not by chance that I said that it's the policy of genius by Lukashenko. Lukashenko has been president of Belarus for the past 30 years, and I believe that he has done a lot for his country, and well, we see that his country is flourishing. Well, I believe that he is one of the closest, if not the closest, ally of Russia. And his foreign policy has been such that Belarus, arguably, is the only republic among the 15 former Soviet republics where you can use Belarus as a platform for international relations, for example, between Russia and the US, Russia and Europe, and even Russia and the Middle East. What do you think?
Well, I think Lukashenko is playing a dangerous game. Again, he appears to be operating on the assumption that Donald Trump has a genuine interest in developing mutual relations with Belarus and operating according to a concept of mutual respect. I don't believe that for a minute. Regardless of, and let me just give you one example to illustrate what I think is being, it's an orchestrated policy where the intelligence community plays almost the decisive, they're the decisive actor in this, of setting the agenda, determining the priorities. Was it 3-4 months ago that Donald Trump hosted in Washington, D.C., the leaders of Azerbaijan and Armenia to sign some sort of peace agreement? I guarantee you, if you would have gone back a year ago and you put a gun to Donald Trump's head and you said, show me on the map of the world where Armenia and Azerbaijan are, he couldn't do it. He wouldn't know where they were. I'm not even sure he knew that there had been a conflict. I guarantee you he knew nothing about Nagorno-Karabakh. And yet he's presented as, oh yeah, we got to bring Armenia and Azerbaijan. I believe, I don't have any inside information on this, but just based upon my prior experience, I believe that the Central Intelligence Agency has a broad finding that is designed to undermine and ultimately destroy Russia. Now, how do they do that? Well, one element of the strategy is to create chaos and instability in the former members of the Soviet Union, like Belarus, Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan. We saw a little over a year ago, you had that attempted coup in Kazakhstan. That wasn't organic to them. That wasn't just because the people one day decided, oh boy, we're upset with our leadership, we're going to overthrow them. This is part of I believe, a coordinated intelligence operation that extends into and probably crosses over with British intent as well. That Russia is a target. This is the West is not looking for a normal relationship with Russia. And let me put it in terms of like a man and a woman dating. In this case, let's put Russia as the female. This is not some guy who says, "Oh, she's attractive. I think she's beautiful. She's intelligent. I want to be with her." It's more this guy said, "I know she's got money, and I'm going to rape her, and I'm going to steal her money." That's the attitude. It's that difference of the attitude. The West wants to rape Russia. I'm sorry to use such strong language, but I cannot emphasize enough that these negotiations that are underway are not negotiations in good faith and have the end result is not to say, hey, let's de-escalate tensions. Because if the United States was serious about that, Donald Trump right now could order those Aegis missile batteries that came off of U.S. naval ships and are now deployed in Poland and Romania, capable of launching nuclear weapons against Russia. Though we're pulling those out. They haven't done that. We're going to return the land, the property in the United States that Barack Obama stole from the government of Russia in December of 2016. We're going to give that back. Haven't done that. There are a whole variety of steps that the United States could take to demonstrate some measure of good faith and like, hey, we've really turned the page. I know that within the Russian Foreign Ministry, that Foreign Minister Lavrov, Deputy Foreign Minister Rybkov, they've been eager to have someone in the United States to talk to. But it's good that they're talking, but also there ought to be the recognition that the United States is not to be trusted.
Давайте будем тогда откровенны. Вы
Okay, let us be sincere then. I wanted to ask you, do you expect that the U.S. with its foreign policy will open a second front, as I asked you several minutes ago, or will there be, or do they want to organize some kind of a domestic explosion within Russia?
I'll say yes to all of the above. Look, if you think that the activities that are underway in places like Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan are irrelevant, that's incorrect. So that's where the second front comes. The United States, instead of trying to take this on head on militarily, is going to try to do it through subversion and through covert action, and trying to promote instability in those, and particularly in Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. But candidly, they're going to try to do it as well in Belarus. It's just, I sometimes I think Russia is too naive, too trusting of the West. And because in the past, there was I think a large segment of the Russian population valued saying, we want to be like the West. They've always seen themselves as European, and I think I'm more of the school that's reflected in the writings of Sergei Karaganov. Russia's future is in the East, not in the West. The West doesn't have anything that Russia needs. And the West comes with a lot of negative baggage that can be harmful to Russia. Now, I think Russia's future is in the East and with the global South. But the United States is going to continue its efforts to subvert and weaken Russia if it can.
Да, вы сейчас упомянули Сергея Александровича Караганова.
Yes, that's right. You mentioned Sergei Karaganov, and I had a chance to interview him several times. Yes, this is a very attractive, a very interesting persona, and you're absolutely right. But right now, you mentioned in your response the Caucasus, Azerbaijan, Armenia. Well, there is a very interesting thing, and it's even offensive a bit. You are saying that Russia should pay attention to to what is going on in the Caucasus in the former Soviet republics. And many Russian experts are saying, let's look at the Caucasus, let's get prepared to what may happen and so on. When I'm talking to different people in my interviews, well, they say, why are you talking about this region? Everything is okay. They are finding a settlement there, and why should we look at this region all the time? I have a question. Well, the Trump route is an idea that will be implemented there or may be implemented there in the Caucasus. And many Russian political scientists say that if we talk about this story between Nagorno-Karabakh and the Vosgezor corridor, the Anglo-Saxons and Vatican is very much interested in that situation. And if this route will be named the Trump route, does this mean that Trump is actually working in the interests of the Vatican and the Anglo-Saxons?
Well, I come back to what I said earlier. Trump works only in Trump's interests. And to the extent that the interest of the Vatican or even that of the United States coincides with his interest, then perhaps. The north-south corridor that Russia is creating in collaboration with Iran is the driving, I think, the driving force behind the Zangezur, that east-west corridor that they're trying to create, the Trump corridor. It's a direct response to that. You need to step back and look at how large the CIA presence is in Armenia. Armenia is a tiny, tiny country. Yet the U.S. Embassy in Armenia is extraordinarily large for a country of that size. And again, I'm not privy to classified information to know, but when I look at that, at the reported size of that embassy in terms of personnel, that tells me there's a large CIA presence. And what would the CIA be doing there? Well, they'd be running covert actions with respect to Russia and to Iran. It's well positioned that they can work in both directions. So there is this. I'm not even sure Donald Trump realizes the competition that's underway there, because it's really. The driving force on the U.S. side is within the intelligence community and the foreign policy establishment. Getting control of Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan is, in my view, seen by the West as an important step towards attacking and weakening Russia, getting control of Russia's resources. Ultimately, that's what this is all about. Russia, as you know, is the number one country in the world for natural resources. The West wants those. They want to control that.
Да, вы абсолютно правы.
Yes, you are absolutely right. And I have a question to you as to someone who is on the other side. Well, geographically, I mean, you are in the U.S.
Right.
How do you see future events developing in the Middle East in 2026?
Continued chaos. And this, I realize Russia is preoccupied with a special military operation in Ukraine, but candidly, I believe that Russia, China, and India in particular could do a lot more to force Israel to stop the genocide they are committing against the Palestinian people. I think Russia, China, and India combined have the economic leverage to, if you will, coerce Israel into stopping this massacre of these people. So that tension's not going to go away. The Zionism, in my view, is as pernicious a notion as communism. And you can make there's some case to be made that the founders, you go back to Marx and Engels, and their heritage, much in common with those with Herzl, the founders of Zionism. And the reason I focus on that is this Zionist mentality. It's tribal, with I guess disguised as a religious, a holy thing. That this is God who said that these people, the Zionists, are the only ones who can live in this land, and anybody else that doesn't fall within that tribe is destroyed. That's why I say it's evil. It doesn't recognize the worth of other people and the respect of human rights. It rejects that. The rights are Zionist rights only for Zionists. So even if Bibi Netanyahu goes away, that sick mentality continues to infect the government of Israel. And that's not, I don't see that going away. So you've got that tension. Israel continues to look for a pretext to attack Iran. What has changed since June 13th of this year, when Israel launched its surprise attack on Iranian leaders, is that Iran finally has awakened to the need that it must have strong military and diplomatic relations with Russia and with China. And we have seen that both the Russians and the Chinese have now rejected Western efforts to reimpose sanctions on Iran and are willing to work with Iran in circumventing those sanctions and helping Iran grow economically. So again, I don't see that tension going away. And then you've got the sectarian strife still in Syria. You don't have a solid, popular elected government. You have an actual bona fide radical Islamic terrorist that was installed as the leader of Syria by the West, with the hopes that he will be another puppet of the West. So I don't see anything in those conditions which argues for stability and an easing of tensions. I think it argues just the opposite, that the tensions will continue to grow.
Но вы про каждый регион, про который я...
Well, you have been responding on every region. You are saying that Trump is only doing what is in the interests of Trump. And, well, it may coincide with what the interests of Vatican or Anglo-Saxons are, but, well, there is another question. Trump, for example, wants to see one situation in the Middle East, but the Anglo-Saxons see it differently. And there is the deep state. Scott Ritter told me about this too. I interviewed him late in August, and he said that there is a deep state. So I wanted to ask, well, this deep state, is it commanding to Trump what Trump should do?
Not so much commanding what Trump should do. Let's be clear what the deep state is. The deep state is the established bureaucracy, and then on top of that, the leaders of that bureaucracy that come with a particular political agenda, and that's very, very difficult to root out. And it's been, this is a transformation over time. You didn't have, it was not as powerful or influential 40 years ago as it is today, in my view. But regardless of what the policy decision is of Donald Trump, there are still activities underway within the intelligence and the military community that can, they can circumvent Trump's decision. They can ignore it. They can drag their feet, not carry it out. all the while maintaining the war footing, keeping the United States involved with wars, creating foreign threats are an essential element of keeping the deep state alive, because war is profitable, and there's, the United States has had repeated opportunities to defuse things. With the collapse of the Soviet Union, and then President Yeltsin, then succeeded by Vladimir Putin, both made repeated requests, to join NATO. Essentially, let's be a part of it. You don't need to have an organization prepared to fight Russia. We're not interested in fighting. Let's live together. Let's be at peace. The West had zero interest in doing that. Zero. And that's because of this institutional commitment to war, because it is profitable. It creates, it's no surprise that you think back to the Joe Biden's Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin. Austin, when he was active duty, was never considered a bright, intelligent guy. He was a beneficiary of what they called DEI policies. They needed a black guy to fill the position. He was a token, but he got put on the board of I can't remember if it was Raytheon or Lockheed Martin, but he made millions. He became a millionaire. And so this opportunity for people as a growing influence to cater to these moneyed interests. This is exactly what Vladimir Putin destroyed back in 2002 when he called all the oligarchs into the Kremlin and had a very frank discussion with them, basically telling them, stay out of politics. You can make your money, but you're not going to sell out Russia to foreigners. And look at the results. Russia has prospered as a country. Whereas in the United States, our budget, particularly for the Department of War, it's more than $1 trillion now. You must realize that the amount of money the United States is spending to prepare for going to war is double that of what Russia and China combined spend on national defense. Think about that. It is the sums are staggering.
Вы когда сказали слово олигархи, у меня сразу
When you said
ассоциация-
oligarchs,
сразу
I
вспомнилось,
was thinking about oil and Venezuela.
Как вы считаете, в
Venezuela,
2026 году
what do you think about 2026?
пойдет ли Трамп
Do you think that something will start in Venezuela, and do you think that Trump will start an open confrontation against the leaders of Venezuela?
No, for this reason. The United States would not be able to sustain such an operation. It would be very, very costly. I think what Trump is trying to do is to provoke Venezuela, Maduro in particular, and one of two things: provoke Maduro and his military into attacking the United States, thereby giving the United States justification for retaliating, or using the threat of military violence as a way to persuade key generals in the Venezuelan army to betray Maduro, overthrow him, and turn to the United States. I witnessed a very similar process back in 1988 when the United States spent more than a year trying to provoke Manuel Noriega, the then leader of Panama, into attacking the United States. We deliberate provocations to try to get that out of him. Ultimately, he succumbed and to the temptation, and the United States invaded in December of 1988. But Venezuela poses far bigger challenges to the United States than, say, the attack on Panama. It is 3 times the size of Vietnam in terms of landmass. Its topography with jungles, mountains, is as rugged, if not more so, than Vietnam. And the borders with Colombia and Brazil mean that there's impossible to control entrance, access in and out of Venezuela. So it's just an area that an insurgency could spring up and operate freely and make it very difficult for any government installed by the United States to survive. So it is, if Trump and his team foolishly decide to attack Venezuela and try to put troops on the ground, because that's ultimately the only way you're going to try to control Venezuela, is you're going to have to put troops on the ground. I think it'll be very, very costly in terms of human loss of U.S. soldiers if Trump chooses that route.
Скажите, а какой бы вы задали
Larry,
вопрос
what would be your question to Vladimir Putin
такая возможность?
if you had an opportunity? And what question would you pose to Alexander Lukashenko of Belarus?
Well, with President Putin, I'd ask him, do you really believe that the United States is sincere about reaching a peace agreement with Russia? I don't think he believes. I don't think he would say yes. No, I really believe that. I see Putin as being an important strategic thinker, and trying to position Russia, put Russia in a position where it's not going to be threatened, and it will have options. So with respect to President Lukashenko, again, I would just ask him to explain, what is your objective in trying to cultivate relations with the West? What do you hope to achieve? Because the West comes with a lot of baggage. The United States, in particular, is not showing up on the doorstep of either Russia or Belarus, saying, "Hey, we just want to be friends. Can't we just get along? Let's share our wealth. Let's figure out ways that we can cooperate and collaborate together." This. I don't. You may not appreciate it by virtue you're Russian, and you may not see it as clearly as I do. But I was fortunate to have a conversation, last month with Vyacheslav Fetisov, and he's a hockey legend, and he described how jarring it was when he went to play hockey in the United States with the New Jersey Devils in 1989, that the U.S. approach and the Canadian approach to playing hockey is all about the individual. The Wayne Gretzky, is the superior hockey player. And what Slava told me was, he said, "Look, I came out of a system where we played as a team. We collaborated. It didn't matter who was the star. The only way we would actually succeed is if we worked together." It is that collaborative mindset, that willingness to cooperate as comrades, that sets Russia apart from the West. That mentality is not common in the West. It's not like we have to be a strong team and every member of that team is important. It's really always about elevating a star and the individual accomplishment, where the success of the individual over the welfare of the whole. The success of the individual always takes first place. Russia approaches it differently. Instead of how can we succeed and rob or steal from the other person, they say, how can we work with others that we can all succeed? I don't believe that's just an idealistic fantasy. I believe that is a genuine part of the Russian mentality.
Мгм. Вот следующий вопрос.
My next question, I believe that you have touched upon it already and maybe even responded partially, but still. Not long ago, there was one American who visited the Russian church, and he said, people come not to ask God, but to live through something, through an experience that is more than you go individually. And people stand in our churches. They don't sit down. An American would say, well, where's the chair? Where's the coffee? And so on. So, he said, after going to a church, I understand why Russians are so strong, and you don't think about weakness even when you pray. And in the middle of the 17th century, Patriarch Macari from Antioch, from Greece, he came, and he said almost the same thing. And 400 years later, we hear this from an American, which means that the Russian spirit is unstoppable, and you cannot win over this spirit. Well, you have visited Russia many times. What do you think? How do you see the Russian spirit being manifested?
Well, it is, as I was mentioning, the concept of collaboration. I truly believe that Russia has an important role to play in the world. And again, Sergei Karaganov has written about this extensively, but the moral corruption, the degeneracy that has become so common in the West, the glorification of sexual deviancy, the rise of transgenderism is the prime example of that. We see Europe, who through history over the last 400 years, Christianity was at the center of Europe. Now, not always in the right way, where you had battles between Catholics and Protestants, that religious wars, all in the name of Christ, were fairly common within Europe, but at least there was a common theme. When you go through the various European capitals, the cathedrals were, one of the distinguishing characteristics. Now, with the influx of so many migrants out of Africa, out of Asia, without national pride, it is diluting those cultures in a way that's dangerous. And that's why I return to say, you look at Russia. Russia's got 140 different ethnic groups. Russia has figured out a way to harness national pride while allowing people to retain their own ethnic identity. And we see that particularly in Chechnya. I've been fortunate to have met and had conversations with General Aludinov, a great Russian patriot, a devout Muslim. And when you go to Chechnya, which the West tried to use the Chechen people as a tool of destruction for Russia, with the Second Chechen War that started in August 7th of 1999 and continued up through 2010. And yet, in spite of that war, the relations now between the Orthodox Christians of Russia and the Muslims of Chechnya is very strong. It's very warm. It's cordial. So that's one thing that Russia has to teach the world: how to accept diversity while retaining your own identity. It's an art. It's not something that you can just follow like a recipe in baking a cake or baking bread. What Russia experienced with the economic collapse in the 1990s, and the recovery from that is another, if you will, lesson learned in Russia, and what it took to recover from that and put Russia, taking it from despair and horror, large unemployment, hyperinflation, deaths, the lifespan of people was dropping, not increasing. Crime was rampant, to what Russia is today. A beautiful nation, safe, clean cities, people prospering. It's no longer people desperate to find a job. There are too many jobs and not enough people, which is a great problem to have. So within all this, I see Russia is uniquely positioned to teach the world, to say, look, there's another way to approach life. The West has been obsessed with causing wars. While Russia is accused of being this military aggressor, this is absolutely not the case. It was provoked in Georgia with Western intelligence backing the attack of Georgia on Russian troops back then. The coup in Maidan in 2014, again, a Western intelligence attack, and then the sustainment of the war that ensued in the Donbass, starting in 2014. Despite all of that, Russia has concentrated itself on building up its infrastructure, making its people wealthy, not just making sure that only a few oligarchs benefit, but that the financial benefits flow to the entire population.
Мне очень интересно задать вам вопрос, как
I wanted to ask you another question. To you as an American, as a foreigner,
трепетно относится к
I see that you like Russian history, you respect Russian history. What is, in your opinion, the best ruler? What was the best ruler in the history of Russia?
Vladimir Putin. I mean, when the history books are written, and again, it makes me sound like I'm a Putin fanboy, but he's 2 years older than me, and I look back at what he, when he was named as prime minister, and maybe there were some people that thought, okay, we can control this kid, he was in his 40s, but the kinds of decisions he's had to navigate over the last 26 years, and the temptation, he could have said, man, I could be like Volodymyr Zelensky. I can steal everything possible. I can gather all this money, all these riches, but you don't see that. The West suggests that he's corrupt, etc., but you don't see him living that, this ostentatious lifestyle of, he's always hanging out with the hot ladies, and, he's partying all the time, and he's going to this place and that place to vacation. He's always working. And navigating the kinds of treacherous waters that he has over the last 26 years to bring Russia to rebuild. Russia has been reborn. It was dead, and it has been resurrected. I count that as a miracle, because to go from what it was in 1999, which I suspect, were you even born in 1999? But you don't have memory of it, but your parents do. And to go from that kind of suffering into the technological greatness of Russia, the beautiful infrastructure, the beautiful architecture, the safety that is now throughout the country. It remarkable accomplishments. If you didn't believe in God, watching what has happened over Vladimir Putin's tenure as president should make you believe in God. I asked that very question of Sergei Karaganov, and he said, yeah, he agreed with me. So yeah, this is when the history books are written. I don't know if they'll call him Vladimir the Great, but he has done an incredible job, despite massive foreign efforts to try to destroy him and Russia.
Да, я родился в 90-м году.
I was born in 1990.
Oh, okay. But you and again, reflect on your own experience. I don't know how much suffering you experienced as a kid growing up, but I'm sure it wasn't. Your parents weren't buying you a brand new bicycle every year.
Вопрос про уходящий 2025 год.
Well, we are saying goodbye to 2025 very soon, and I will ask you not about 2026, but the next 5 years maybe. What can you say about the year 2025, and what do you think lies ahead of us for the next 5 years, give or take?
I think 2025 was a critical year for the growth and establishment of BRICS as a permanent economic order. This is the year that the military weakness and the economic weakness of the West, particularly the United States, was exposed. So this transformation of the international financial and political order, that's underway now. And it's just as what happened at the end of World War II, the Great Patriotic War, where the Bretton Woods system was set up. It was international, to deal with international finances, trade. They created institutions like the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank. Then there was, on the political side, the United Nations. It created let's call it a Eurocentric financial and political world order, in which all countries were faced with the coercion of having to participate in that. BRICS now is creating, it has created a new system, an alternative, a competitor in some aspects, but one that actually, I think, is likely to replace the Western system. And we see the West is showing signs of grave fragility and instability. The U.S. debt to GDP ratio is like 127%. Similarly, France is in a similar situation. The UK is having to borrow more money to finance its government operations, and so its debt to GDP ratio is growing. And the same in Germany, which used to have a very low debt to GDP, but now they've basically passed legislation saying they can engage in deficit spending. At the same time, we're not seeing the reindustrialization of these countries. Trump is trying to do that in the United States. I'm not sure he's really having success, but Germany is deindustrializing. It's shrinking. The same in France, the same in the United Kingdom. So throughout Europe. So with this rise of a new global system in which China and Russia along with India, will be the dominant players and will exert great influence. They bring a different kind of attitude than that which is prevalent in the West. In the West, as we've seen with Donald Trump, he wants to use the power of the dollar as a weapon against other countries to force other countries to do what the United States demands. And we saw the attempt to bully India most recently, telling them to stop buying Russian oil. And the Indians said, no, we're going to continue to buy it. And they're looking for ways outside of dollar denominations. That's why we've seen China and Brazil in various trade transactions, they're paying with their respective currencies. And that's one of the reasons gold has been going up in price, because China has been buying gold to back its currency. So what I see going forward is likely a period of great economic chaos in the West, the possibility of attacking Russia and maybe China, again, out of desperation, as these economies try to use war as a way to reignite their economic growth. I think they've reached they're past the point of no return, and then let's call it the bullying activity, the aggressive activities of the West against countries in the global South and in the East will spur further desire to develop alternative systems, alternatives to the United Nations, for example. At least the United Nations, as is currently constituted, cannot continue. There is no way that pissant, little useless countries like the United Kingdom and France should have a veto power in the UN Security Council on par with that of Russia or China. Those two countries are non-entities. They offer nothing to the world anymore. There was a time when they were powerful international actors, but that age is over. That's done. Countries like India have greater reason to be at the table. Same for Brazil. And there are countries in Africa that are, frankly, not properly represented, such as Nigeria. So this a new emerging political order, brand new, I think is on the horizon as well. But normally that comes out of great chaos or war. So I can't rule out the possibility of the Europeans overreaching, attacking Russia, and in the ensuing war, Europe is destroyed, and out of those ruins will come a new world order, with Russia and China playing the dominant role.
Предпоследний вопрос.
Last but one question.
Исходя из вашего ответа, вопрос такого плана.
Thank you for your responses. But, well, if we compare two things, Yalta, the Yalta II, possible agreements, and on the other, a new Vienna, like the Anschluss that happened, something that happened before the war, but only the Anschluss on the territory of Ukraine. Which one will overweigh the other?
Oh, I think it'll be a Yalta. Look, this is, I do not see a diplomatic end to the war, or, the special military operation with Ukraine. And the reason I don't call it a war, because Russia has not fully mobilized. Russia is only partially mobilized, and it mobilized only a fraction of its capability. But even that fraction is greater than anything that Ukraine or the West can defeat. While it would be nice to have a diplomatic solution, I think the solution will ultimately be military. I think a good chance that the military victory will be secured by the end of 2026. The capability of the Ukraine military to sustain operations is growing more difficult with each passing day, and with the continued staggering losses that they are experiencing. So I believe ultimately Russia will take Kyiv and Nikolaev and Odessa. And Ukraine will be completely cut off from the Black Sea. And then it will be even a question of whether it can continue to exist as a nation, because of Romania and Hungary also, and Poland have claims on different parts of what is now Ukraine. But I think the only viable option for Russia is a decisive military victory, and then sort of as with Yalta, determining what the post-war world would look like.
Финальный вопрос, который
My
я
final
задаю
question.
всем.
I ask this question. I actually address this question to all my guests. 3 books that actually made you a person that you are today.
I'd start with the Bible. I started reading the Bible at a relatively young age, read it through 2 or 3 times. So, if you will, providing a theological or religious foundation. The book that wasn't so much inspiring, but it made a tremendous impact on me. Again, and I read it relatively when I was like 13 or 14. William Schreier's book, The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. That was, that helped shaped my view of, this massive conflict that cost so many lives. And then, the third, it's on the fantasy front, Lord of the Rings. I found that as a enthralling trilogy. Those are my 3.
Спасибо вам огромное за интересные
Larry,
ответы.
thank you very much for these wonderful answers, for this wonderful discussion. You are a very intelligent, a very learned person. Thank you very much. It's nice to deal with you.
Well, when you have someone asking good questions, it's easy for me to look smart. So thank you.
Спасибо вам огромное.
Thank you, Larry.
Зрители, я напоминаю,
And,
выпуск программы на
dear
связи.
audience,
Евгений
Evgeny Davutov was interviewing Larry, and you can get subscribed to our channel and send us your comments, put your likes, and you can read the newspapers, the Parliamentary Assembly of Belarus and Russia. You can read about everything there, and Larry Johnson, an ex-analyst of the CIA, was my guest today. Larry, thank you very much, and we'll meet again, I'm sure.
Thank you, Evgeny.
Союзное Вече представляет актуальная повестка, новые факты и волнительные прогнозы только в программе Евгения Давутова «На связи».